Welcome to Your Need to Know. Today I'm talking with Sallyann Bergh, who is the Executive Director of Fairfax Futures. Welcome, Sallyann.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for having me today.
So Fairfax Futures is a nonprofit focused on early childhood education. And how did you come to, I guess give us the background on Fairfax Future, but how did you come to be the Executive Director of Fairfax Futures?
Sure. Well, Fairfax Futures, we were founded in 2004, so we are celebrating our 15th anniversary, which is really exciting. And we were launched at the early, basically a business summit for business professionals to understand why early childhood is so important here in our community. So we focus heavily on school readiness and ensuring all children are ready for kindergarten. So personally, I came on board just a little over a year ago. So I'm really excited to be in this position and see how I can make an impact here in the local community.
So school readiness, it's very interesting that there's an actual symposium for businesses to really focus on how early childhood education ends up impacting workforce development, which if you think about it makes complete sense, but maybe isn't obvious. The Virginia Children's Cabinet just added a school readiness officer, Jenna Conway. I met her earlier this year, and I think that says something about Virginia's commitment to school readiness. Tell me a little bit about the kinds of programs Fairfax Futures has that supports this commitment to early childhood education.
Well, let me back up for a second and just note that Fairfax Futures, we partner closely with the county's Office for Children. And that partnership really helps us ensure that we are aligned in our strategies. We are continuing to focus on enhancing our current programs and bringing on new activities that strengthen the early childhood educator workforce. Because those educators here in our community are such an important piece of the puzzle to ensure every child is well prepared for kindergarten and that they're set up nicely to be a viable member of our future workforce. So the business community plays a huge role in this process because we couldn't do our work without their generous support as well as the philanthropic community, foundational support. So some of our programs I can get into if that makes sense for you, but I'll share a couple of ways in which we work through that early childhood workforce. We have a STEM Ready program, and we know that STEM learning, science, technology, engineering, and math, yes. Sometimes we add the arts to that to make it STEAM, which is really critical. I approve of adding
art.
Yep. So we have this wonderful 14-hour course for educators to come and learn these early STEM concepts. Because if you don't start at those early years, 0 to 5, we're kind of missing the boat. And we try to make it clear that educators need to understand these skill sets so that they can apply what they're learning in this course activity back to the classroom with the children under their care. We also have another program that looks at how children's literature, plays such a huge role in helping an educator to instill the 7 essential life skills that every child needs to know for their own learning and growth, and that developing resilience and that love for learning. So that's another wonderful program that we are offering again this summer. So the business community, making sure that they understand why investing in early childhood education is so important is something that we are heavily focused on. For example, the business community has historically the focus tends to be a little bit more on the kindergarten through 12th grade years and higher ed. And obviously, education across all levels is very important. I support that. We all support that. But we want to make sure we're not missing those early years, that 0 to 5. And the research supports why that investment is one of the best investments we can make in our children's future.
Well, so here's something interesting. You're redefining how we're talking about this, right? So early childhood to a lot of people means preschool, pre-K. But and I heard Jenna Conway say that we need to start thinking about early childhood as birth to 5.
Yes.
Birth to 5. Like, children start learning from learning to smile to learning to sit up. I mean, this is a natural progress. So there are points all along the way in which you can enrich that child's understanding, their cognitive abilities, the way they interact with the world. And so a lot of people who take on child care positions in our culture and in our community, they're not necessarily well-respected professionals, even as much as classroom teachers. I think it's fascinating that your programs are really about professional development,
Yes.
which is something that the Office of Children has always focused on. Going back to 1974 when they were founded, it has always been about supporting and educating and helping provide professional development for the people taking care of the very youngest children. And I think for a lot of viewers, this is not going to be something that they've thought about this way.
Exactly.
You know? So how do we help people to, you know, reorient their vocabulary and the language we use to talk about what is early childhood?
You know, the 0 to 5, like you said, is important. Sometimes we think 3 to 5, or we think kindergarten and up. But, you know, I think about it from the perspective that we were all children, and there is a person or a program or something that we can each probably recall from those earliest days, some of our first memories, that really supported our own lifelong learning and our love for being creative and adventurous and having that curious spark come to life. So these early childhood educators are such a pillar of our community, and it's important that we recognize their value and their worth and the great work that they're doing, because, you know, especially in this Northern Virginia community where we have a lot of growth happening across the business sector.
There's a tremendous demand for early childhood services.
Yes, and if we don't have the right, I guess, process and foundation in place to support those educators and ensure that they're continuing to grow in their profession, and that they are not only that they're getting the right competencies, and that's what a lot of our programs are focused on, making sure they are growing in their competencies and their own development and growth, but also there's this whole other piece on compensation, which we won't even have time to get in today.
But it's huge.
It's huge, and you know, the business community really isn't going to be able to thrive and continue to grow if we don't have the supply that we really need to keep, you know, mothers and fathers in the workforce. And the demand is great. I think, I can't remember the exact statistic, but Northern Virginia has a very high percentage where both parents are in the workforce.
You're right.
And you know, it makes sense. It's a high cost
and that's
of
why
living.
businesses come here. You know,
Exactly.
Amazon HQ2 didn't pick us for no reason.
Yes.
They picked us because we have a highly educated workforce. There is an available workforce, and so we can expect that, you know, as companies move in, they are hiring people who either have children or will have children. And beyond their own policies about leave, businesses should be invested in how are they going to find daycare or childcare, and you know, where will it be? Will they be able to afford it? Arlington, I just saw an article recently about how extraordinarily expensive childcare is in Arlington.
Yes.
So how do we here in Fairfax, you know, support the work of the Office for Children and other programs, and even home-based childcare? You know, and I think a lot of times people don't think about child care providers working out of their home as being educators. Too many people think they are babysitters.
Yes. And Catherine, the language is something that has to shift, and that's why you'll hear me continuously saying early childhood educator, not babysitter or nanny, and you know,
or even child care provider.
Child care provider, even that term is sort of becoming an
they're early
older
childhood
way of
educators.
thinking.
And I mean,
Exactly.
and they're with that child probably more waking hours than their own parents are.
Exactly. You know, child care educators are one of the most consistently present adults in a young child's life, next to the family members. And because of that time that they're spending with their young children, that's why it's so important for everyone in the community to get behind this idea of how are we preparing our children for school and kindergarten and workforce and all the things that they're going to have come into their lives. And it really starts at those very young ages with those educators.
And there's a lot to educate them on. You were saying earlier, too, that you came from a nutrition policy background. Now, a lot of people may not think, well, why would it be important to educate educators on nutrition? And yet there's a physiological foundation for how a child's brain develops based on whether they are eating a healthy, nutritious diet.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, the neuroscience research backs this. By the time a child turns 5 years of age, 85 to 90% of their brain has already been developed, and that's on the social emotional front, all the developmental pieces of how our brain has to, function as we get older. And also in addition to that neuroscience support, the economic support, investing in this early childhood space. There's some great research out there from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and an economist named James Heckman. It's a hard way to say that.
James Heckman.
Yes, and it's some great research if you haven't had a chance to take a look. It basically breaks it down. For every dollar that our community invests in high quality early childhood programs, we can expect to see up to $16 go back into the community's pockets. And that return on investment can kind of be a little fuzzy sometimes and hard to understand. So you can break it down by looking at it from this perspective. If I had a young child in a high quality program, that my child is more likely to be a healthier kid growing up. They're more likely to stay in school longer, to get into college, to be promoted to the job that they want one day, and less likely to get involved in the criminal justice system. Those are just a couple of the ways in which the research supports that emphasis on investing in the high quality early ed space. So it's really critical that people understand, we're not just supporting something because it sounds nice. No, it actually has some research to support.
And I think we need to really talk about it in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of thinking that we'll worry about educating children once they're actually in the school system,
Mm-hmm.
that we think in terms of who is taking care of America's very youngest children,
Yep.
who's taking care of them here in the county. And I do think when people who don't have young children think, well, how does it affect
Mm-hmm.
me? But there's lots, besides businesses, there's all kinds of community organizations, even
Yep.
in neighborhoods, having parks available for children to play,
Exactly.
are ways in which you support early childhood education, like the way
Exactly.
we all can.
Yeah, I don't have children, but I have nieces, I have nephews, I love children, and I think that it's, school readiness is something that the whole community has to get behind. Because when you support this field, you're not just supporting, little Johnny going off to kindergarten, but you're supporting all children, you're supporting the community, you're supporting more vulnerable families. Fairfax County is very affluent, and I think people sometimes think, why do organizations supporting certain causes need any extra support? But there are these pockets of our community that are still very vulnerable. And here at Fairfax Futures, we really strive to make sure that all those families that are living in those more impoverished parts of our community have these access to and support of these types of programs.
Well, and I want to talk to you a little bit about One Fairfax when we come back from our break, because the county has
great.
made a commitment, the way that Virginia has made a commitment. So please join us after this break. I'm talking with Sallyann Bergh of Fairfax Futures.
It's a short ride from your neighborhood to your naturehood. Find fun activities to do, like boating and biking, or camping and hiking, plus much more. To find a neighborhood park or green space near you, visit discovertheforest.org.
Your time is gonna come. Your time is gonna come. It's up to you to reach out to be that friend who comes along. Your day is gonna come.
When you make a friend, you make a difference.
Your day is gonna come.
Friendship, pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
Operation Wonder Park is a go!
There's nothing more powerful than imagination. But don't just imagine. Use STEM to change the world.
Who's with me?
It's gonna hurt tomorrow.
If she can STEM, so can you. Find out more at She Can STEM.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. Today I'm talking with Sallyann Bergh. She is the Executive Director of Fairfax Futures. Sallyann, when we went to break, we were talking a little bit about the fact that there are pockets of poverty here in Fairfax County, which is considered one of the more affluent counties, if not the most affluent county in the country. So tell me a little bit about, how we identify who these families are and why One Fairfax was created by Fairfax County to address these disparities.
Yeah, it's a great topic to talk about. I wish we weren't talking about it though. But here in Fairfax County, there are approximately 74,000 children under the age of 5. And unfortunately, I just came across this statistic that seems surprising to me, but 1 in 5 of those children are economically disadvantaged. And like you said, we have this perception, or it's not really a perception, it is real that Fairfax County is very affluent. But despite that, we still have these, certain zip codes, certain communities, families are more vulnerable. And because, we are going to, unfortunately, probably continue to see income inequality over the next number of years. So we, here at Fairfax Futures, we really feel that it's so important to ensure that there are solid school readiness supports to come alongside these families that are struggling in some capacity, to make sure that they can afford to send their child to a child care center or family child care home provider, or that they are able to qualify to get a subsidy so that the price to send their child to child care is more affordable.
The cost is prohibitive.
It is.
Especially for people who work in 2 or 3 service wage jobs, and you've got young children, it's particularly hard. And some of them, the housing is so expensive here that often they're living in very crowded conditions as well. None of this is particularly conducive to giving a very young child a healthy environment and giving them the skills they need to successfully be in a pre-K or kindergarten program.
Exactly. And I think that is a big reason why One Fairfax was created. The Board of Supervisors and the county came together to pass this resolution a few years ago. And it's really, One Fairfax serves as a framework to ensure that equity is considered in every decision making, that decision that the county is, has to make a decision on every year.
And that's education, and that's housing, and it's transportation.
Exactly.
It's all kinds of things.
It's all kinds of things. And, it's looking at how do you develop policies and programs and services in an equitable way, and then how do you distribute them equitably? So from the child care point of view, or early childhood educational point of view, we have to look at what is the access and availability of these programs, so that, as I mentioned, families are able to know what's available to them and how do I go about getting my child enrolled. Going a step further, or maybe more detailed into the early childhood space, the county also created this wonderful equitable school readiness strategic plan. And that was, work across Fairfax Futures was involved in the process, along with the county's Office for Children and the school system, and parents and families. They received input from them as well. But the report that came out of that has 5 strategies, and it's really it's a call to action for us to really roll up our sleeves and dig in and figure out how do we get these supports in place so that all children, all families have the access that they need. And it's really bringing the community together so that, you don't have government officials over here, you don't have the nonprofit leaders, you don't have the business communities. Things aren't just working in silos. We're all coming together and we're finding solutions that work for everyone.
And so, how do you find the children? The thing about children trying to make sure they've got the skills to be school ready is that often they don't raise their hand until they enroll in kindergarten.
Yeah.
So what is the strategic plan for saying how do we find the very young children? Where are they?
Yeah, it's multifaceted in how we go about that. But the county does know what are the child care programs out there, and these are early childhood centers and family child care homes, which if you run a family child care home, you are a business in our
That's
community.
right, and there is a permitting process.
Exactly.
In Fairfax, Alexandria, and Arlington are unique in that they have a permitting process that's been in place for a long time,
Yep.
and that's 3 counties out of 95 counties in Virginia.
Yeah.
many of whom don't. You know, Fairfax in so many ways is rich in resources, but it's also rich in the number of nonprofits and businesses and other organizations and agencies that care enough to put resources and time in developing something like a strategic plan.
Exactly. Yeah, and you know, because Fairfax Futures works with the county, we're able to know what are those programs that exist in the community, and from there, how many children are enrolled, and from there, are children falling behind in certain ways. The county, you know, is really making part of the strategic plan is to ensure every child has a social emotional or developmental screener, so that before they enter kindergarten, we have some input understanding if a child has any kind of delays, and that they're getting the right supports and resources in place, you know, whether it's going to their pediatrician or working with the county, you know, a speech therapist or other kind of you know, individual that works on different kinds of disorders and issues that children may be faced with, so that they're not falling behind when they get to kindergarten.
And is that a change in mindset? Because, you know, there is a very high ratio of children with autism, for instance. You know, the number has gotten, it used to be 1 in 98, and then it was 1 in 68, and then it was like 1 in 45, and it's kind of like, are there more instances of autism, or are we getting better at identifying children on the spectrum, either before they're in school or early when they're in school? And so are we kind of changing our mindset about the importance of doing really intensive screening for very young children and not just waiting for them to fail in school?
I think that as we see the growth, the rise of IEPs, these individual educational plans that children may need to give them a little extra support when they get to school, you know, I think the public school system is starting to recognize that this is too much. We can't always handle this on public funding. So if we can find a way to mitigate some of those or lessen the impact of resources needed later, you know, I'm not quite 100% sure why we're seeing more of those cases on the rise. It may just be that we have more information at our fingertips. And I think for the most part, parents may be a little more clued in than they were in the past. But also from the early childhood educator perspective, we are making more efforts to train them on identifying those types of things early on, so that they know how to have those conversations with parents and be able to, you know, work out a plan. Because if you're an educator and have a child falling behind in your classroom, it can be very disruptive to how you know, keep your class moving forward.
Well, beyond Fairfax, I will say this, that there was a victory here in Virginia in the autism community to have the cap on behavioral therapy rolled back from the age of 10 to no cap. And so I believe Governor Northam is signing that, has signed that into law. And, you know, first it was like ages 2 to 4 or 2 to 6, and then it was 10. And the autism community lobbied very hard to say these behavioral interventions, while they are certainly important for the very youngest children, they need to continue throughout the educational process for children who have cognitive disabilities. You know, so I love the fact that at every level, whether it's Fairfax County or it's the Commonwealth of Virginia, people are understanding what supports are going to help children, the very youngest children to older children, be successful in their education.
Exactly. It's critical, and I think, you know, government plays a role, but we also have to educate our teachers and our parents out there too, because the government can't do everything, as we know.
They can't, and so for child care providers, especially who are in a center or home-based, they may not necessarily have the professional development or support to know when a child may have special needs.
Exactly. You know, this year we had our annual school readiness symposium, and this is a big day-long forum that we host every year. The last 10 years we've had the generous support of the PNC Foundation, which, by the way, PNC is a wonderful example of an organization that gets it. They understand that investment. But anyway, this year our symposium focused on that topic of health, and not just nutrition and what we put in our bodies, but also that social emotional piece. And you know, programs like that are things that we need to be talking about more in the community. And trauma is a big thing too. We didn't even we barely scratched the surface of trauma at that event, but that's something. You know, the county and we at Fairfax Futures, we're trying to find strategies and programs to help advance that conversation around these issues, because it's sensitive, and an educator especially, having a conversation with a parent when they think maybe that their child has gone through some kind of traumatic experience or has some kind of developmental delay. Those are tough conversations to have. So I think it's really just educating our community, getting everyone on board to say it's okay to have these, and it doesn't mean that your child is any less of a kid, because we're just here to help you and give you those supports so that they're not going to fall behind, and they're going to have they have that equitable playing field.
Well, I think trauma is something that could be a whole separate show, because there's all kinds of reasons that children are traumatized. There are children who are placed into foster care. We haven't even talked about the special needs of very young children who are in child protective services for whatever reason. We have an opioid crisis right now that's impacting families tremendously. Deportation is tremendously affecting families, or just the threat, the fear surrounding that is affecting very young children. And I don't think people are thinking, when we have these public debates, about a child first sort of lens, like, okay, these families, what happens to the children? What happens to the children? Whether the parents are put into a rehabilitation program, or they're incarcerated, or they're deported, what happens to the children?
Exactly. It's so critical, and you're right. Keeping the child front and center is really what this school readiness strategic plan is doing. Because if we don't put the children's needs first, then we're really doing a disservice for our entire community.
And right, and one way or another, whether it's the school system or it's other kinds of agencies or social services, everybody ends up trying to support the child. Better to be preventative and proactive than to try to be however you say, remediative. Yes. So this symposium, it's every year?
It's every year. We, as I mentioned at the beginning, we are in our 15th year of service to the community, and our symposium we just had the 15th event. So it really started as a much smaller affair to get leaders and educators all on the same page of what exactly is school readiness. We've been talking about this issue for a long time, and now we bring in 300 or so early childhood educators for a day-long event, and every year the topics change, and it's very, everyone wants to be there. So we have some fabulous speakers. We had a physician, a pediatrician from California came in this year as our keynote speaker, and we had a licensed social worker and some other doctors talking about health in the classroom. So it's a lot of fun.
Well, it sounds like something that people should pay more attention to, and they can find more information on your website, which is fairfax-futures.org.
Yes.
So thank you very much, Sallyann. And this, at home, is what you need to know.